Hello, and welcome to Charted, an astrology podcast. My name's James, and today we're going to talk about the sun. So in the last episode, we looked at the planets kind of more generally, more broadly, looked at why they're important, what they're about, and now we're going to go through each planet individually and look at what they mean, what they represent, and how we kind of use them in a chart. So we're going to start with the sun. Now, the sun is obviously it's not a planet in an astronomical sense, right? It's obviously a star. It's a ball of gas. But the sun and the moon in astrology are considered the luminaries. So they kind of have this special category. Their meanings are slightly, I don't want to say more important, but they certainly have a slightly elevated status compared to the other planets. But we still refer to them as planets just for the sake of just easy organizationally. Now, we're going to look at the sun first. The sun and the moon both kind of are the lights, hence luminaries. They each govern a different aspect of time, right? The sun during the day, the moon at night. And obviously, we know that the moon can rise during the daytime just from a realistic point of view, but for the sake of kind of metaphorical kind of thinking, the moon rules the nighttime, the sun rules the daytime. So, what does the sun mean? Well, there's going to be kind of 2-3 key themes that the sun really, really represents. And we're going to look at this in terms of what the sun is and how it operates kind of on its own in terms of real life, and then what we can make sense of that astrologically. So the very first thing the sun's going to represent is the idea of consciousness, right? And what does that mean? To be conscious means to be aware. So when we say the sun represents consciousness, it represents our awareness. Awareness of what? Awareness of the self. Right? Awareness of the world, awareness of existence. So when we say we are conscious beings, it means we have a level of awareness relative to other things, to other living creatures. Right? Other animals, for instance, kind of seem aware that other things are in the world, but there's not really necessarily a strong sense of self or identity that we can tell. Right? Maybe their brains haven't developed. Maybe they don't have that thing called a soul. Right? Humans, we tend to think we have a soul or a spirit of some way. Personally, that's my belief. But some people don't necessarily hold to that. But there's definitely something going on for us. And I think the more you dig into astrology, kind of more esoteric things, and even certain ways scientific stuff in certain fields, there's definitely something going on that we cannot see, right? That's kind of beyond us that we haven't been able to figure out completely. But the sun represents that sense of awareness, that sense of consciousness, that soul, if you want to call it that is us. And why does it represent that? Well, if we think of what happens during the day, what's the very first thing? You have the morning, right? It's nighttime, it's dark, you can't see anything, and then the first thing that happens is the sun slowly creeps towards the horizon. And in that moment, just before the sun peaks over the horizon, the sky begins to slowly go from black to gray, and then suddenly things become visible. They become clear. And it's a fairly quick process. If you've ever gotten up early and watched the sunrise, it really does go from dark to light in a fairly quick fashion. And that kind of moment, that sudden gleam of light as it peaks over the horizon, that sudden, I can see, I'm awake. That's the consciousness that the sun represents in us. It's that sense of, I am here, I am awake now, I am aware of my existence, I am aware of myself. So the sun is a very self-aware planet, and it's about that sense of self. And we'll see that kind of sense of self come in the next theme in a moment. Now, with consciousness then, right, awareness, because the sun is bright, it's visible, right? It's obvious. We know the sun exists because it's so dang bright. It's hard not not to notice that it exists. And so this brightness then is something that's inherent in every person. We have something inside of us that tends to shine and radiate outward. Now, this is a very abstract concept, and I will admit that, but it's each person in their personhood, in their soul, whatever you want to call it, has some piece of them that's very capable of radiating outward in a way that can be seen, that can be noticed by other people. So the sun is going to be a very visible part of a personality. This is in some ways why the popularity of sun signs really came about. Now, that's a whole topic for a different day. Has a lot to do with a book written in the 60s. But regardless, the sun is a very visible component of the chart. And so for a lot of people, it's something that as they age, as they kind of grow into the sun, it really becomes a noticeable part of them, which is why using purely the sun sign in astrology kind of took off, because it's something that, yeah, there is something to it, but it's not the only thing by any means. It's only a component. So the sun's going to represent consciousness, and it's going to represent our visibility of that consciousness, but also our visibility in life. We haven't talked about the houses yet, but the 10th house tends to be our public persona, our public image, how we're perceived by society, our reputation. But the sun also has a certain element of that to it. Well, it's not necessarily tied into our career. It is in many ways going to show kind of where we tend to show our light. Where is our light shining in life? So if you have the sun in, say, the 7th house, you're going to tend to show your sense of self, your purpose, your will, your desire, your light that you have within you kind of towards other people, towards partnerships. If it's in the 5th house, maybe it'll be towards children or pleasures or things you find enjoyable, things you're passionate about. If it's in the 11th, it's going to be towards society at large, friends, community, or chasing after goals, ambitions. Right? So whatever part of your chart your sun is in is going to tend to be where you are going to find that sense of consciousness really kind of manifest, really kind of show up in the world in a way that's visible. Now, the next thing, and honestly probably the most prominent thing that the sun really represents, is going to be the center or the core of something. So let's unpack this. If we think about the solar system, right? How does the solar system work? Well, it starts with what? The sun, because that's the central piece of gravity that everything else in the solar system revolves around. They're all contained within the sun's gravitational pull. And so as they're stuck in that kind of zone, they can kind of move around it, but they can never escape it, right? Not without great effort. You have to actively move against it, which the planets don't do, right? They're just balls of rock in space for the most part, or gas. So the sun's mass is what keeps everything going in the solar system. Now, that means that if you were to take the sun away, if it suddenly disappeared at the blink of an eye, right, what would happen? All the planets would just spin off in random directions because there would no longer be that central core piece holding them together. So the sun represents that in our charts. It's the central idea, the central theme, the central piece, the central component to who we are. Now, if we look at a birth chart, there's 3 kind of main things that I always focus on as far as the kind of the core concept of who someone is. That's the ascendant and rising sign, the sun, and the moon. The moon is very much going to be subconscious in terms of our subconscious motivations and needs, but the sun is our conscious motivations as well as our kind of identity. It's kind of who we are trying to be. And the ascendant acts more as just a framework. It's kind of like the shape of who you are. It's not really an active part of your personality outside of it's just the framework through which you have to operate. But the sun is kind of like that drive. It's like the captain. right? It's the thing that really is in charge and kind of moving. Because wherever the sun goes in the universe, all the other planets have to follow. So there's a leadership component to the sun. There's again, it's that central part of the sun. And then lastly, there's a sense of identity. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you were to look at any solar system, any galaxy in space, how do you know which ones are which? You look at the star, right? Because that's the central component. If you were to look at, say, a car, right? Do people know different cars based on their engines? Maybe the most super duper into car people there is, but the average person, no. If you were to say, oh, that has this engine or that engine, most people would have no clue what you're talking about. Or tires, right? If you said to somebody, oh, look at this car, you can identify it based on its tires, most people would look at you like you're crazy. But you show them the shape, right? The chassis, the external frame. That's how people know what a car is, because they look at that part of it. And that's kind of like what the sun is. It's that framework almost. Now, I said the ascendant is like the framework. The sun is kind of like the visible component to that, right? It's that outer layer so that we can see what it is, how we know something is something. I don't look at a fish and say, oh, this is a fish because I can see a fishtail. No, you look at a fish and say it's a fish because I can see the whole body, right? And that's what the sun is. The sun is the identifying core piece. Another thing with that then is that if you lose the central identity of something, it becomes something else, right? Think of us as humans. If you cut off our limbs, we're still a person, right? We're missing a limb or two, but we're still a person. The main thing has not gone. It has not changed. Damaged maybe, but has not changed. You take away somebody's torso and just leave the limbs, and you no longer have a person, right? It's no longer living. Or we could apply this to the realm of, say, ideas. Let's take a political system, right? Democracy. What is democracy? It's a political system in which the people vote on a policy, a candidate, whatever it's going to be. But the core underlying principle of a democratic system is you have a popular vote in some way, shape, or form. But if you put in somebody and they say, well, we like what we have, but we're going to keep everything we have in this political system, except we're going to get rid of the voting. It's no longer going to be that way. It's going to be by lineage. Well, surprise, you no longer have a democratic system, right? You can't identify it by that anymore. Alternatively, you can't look at a democratic system and say, oh, I can identify it because they have a president. Because you could have a president in any kind of political system. But the reason it's democratic is because there is the democratic process. People vote. And so that's what the sun represents, that identity, that central theme, that central idea, the core piece of what something is. And there's certain benefits to this, certain strengths to this, as well as certain challenges. Number one, when you have a strong sense of self, strong sense of identity, you know who you are, right? That's going to allow you to be confident going through life, because you're not also, right, as you go through life, you're going to deal with a lot of challenges. Life is hard. That's the natural way that life is. But if you know who you are, there's a confidence in, I know what I am, I know what I'm capable of, I know what I can and cannot do. So you can navigate life through that lens with no fear that the part of you that is might falter, that might do something unexpected. But if you don't know who you are, right, you have a weak sense of identity, you're not sure. And everybody does at some point, right? As I said, the sun is something we grow into. Most people, I would say nobody's born with a sun that is complete. Everybody has to kind of grow into the sun. And some people do earlier, some people do later. It's just the nature of how things go. But when we haven't kind of figured it out yet, you have this sense of, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm truly about. I don't know what I actually want to do or what I want to be, right? And so there's this kind of active component to finding your identity. And people put it in all kinds of things, right? I'm a plumber. I'm a dentist. I'm a political whatever, right? I have these political beliefs. I have those, things. I'm a husband. I'm a wife. I'm a father. Whatever it's going to be, people tend to find things that they really attach their identity to and become, okay, I am this. But the reality is, those are just external pieces we're trying to shift our identity to. At the end of the day, we can have those things. We can be those labels, but we are more than the label, and we have to always get to a place where we can recognize that. So having this strong sense of identity gives us stability. And if we think of the sun, what is the sun? It is the most stable thing in our universe. Why? Because we can consistently rely on it to rise every day and set every night and repeat day after day after day after day. And that is something no person on the planet ever has to be concerned about, right? It is extremely reliable. It is extremely stable. We can act with pure confidence that we don't have to worry about the sun because we know what it is. We know what it's going to do. And that's the other part of our identity is when people know who we are, not only does it give us confidence, but it gives people confidence. People want to follow somebody who's sure, who is certain, right? People don't want to follow a leader who doesn't know what they're doing and openly kind of shows that they don't know what they're doing. But when you have a leader who acts like they know what they're doing, has a level of confidence, right? People follow. Now, going back to this identity, this idea of visibility, right? Something identity is going to give us is a sense of visibility. It's going to show people I am X, I am Y, I am Z, right? Whatever it is. If you're a plumber and that's what you really identify, you just do all the plumber things. I don't know why I picked plumber for this example, but let's just say, right? You've got your whole toolkit. You live, breathe plumbing, right? You read all the books to the extent that there are books, do all the things, you're teaching it. You spend your whole life, all the time you have is devoted to plumbing and everything to do with plumbing, right? People are going to know that. When they see you, they're going to know, hey, this guy's the plumber, right? This guy is the plumber. Like he knows his stuff. And so they have questions. They know who to go to, right? Because they know this is what you are. But if you present that image of I'm a plumber, but you're not really, right? Maybe you're a computer scientist or an engineer or an artist, but you project this image of a plumber, right? There's a disconnect here because then when people go to go to the thing that they see that you are, but you are not, right? It's going to cause problems. And that's why it's so important for us to figure out who we are, figure out what is our identity. And again, it's something we grow into. And so from an astrological point of view, we want to look to, if we're trying to figure out, what am I? I don't know. What should I be? You look at your chart and see where your sun is. Because what sign it's in is going to tell you the kind of way or the potential for that sun, what it's going to be, how it's going to kind of compose itself, some of its motivations. And then you look at the house, and that'll tell you a lot about where you tend to want to put that light. Because again, it's a light that you're shining. It's an intentional thing. You don't wake up one day and just say, well, shoot, I guess I woke up and now I'm a carpenter. I guess that's what I have to do. No, it's an active choice. You get to choose what you want to be. That's not to say there aren't certain limitations that we have by any means. A week or two ago, we watched as a family Toy Story for the first time with my girls. They're 3-year-olds. And one of the themes in that movie that very much went over my girls' heads, but it's such an interesting story because you have, obviously, spoilers. I can't imagine anybody at this point hasn't seen it who'd be listening to this, but you have Buzz Lightyear, one of the toys, right, and Woody. And Woody is aware, hey, we're toys, right? I know who I am. I know what I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do, and he's accepted it, and he has no problems with it, and he's confident in that. Whereas Buzz thinks he's not. He thinks he's the real Space Ranger, when in fact he's a toy. And so when he kind of runs into this moment where he sees a commercial showing all the Buzz Lightyear toys, he has this sudden identity crisis where he doesn't know what to do with himself. And I feel like this is something for a lot of people. At some point in life, you kind of hit this wall, this moment of, I thought I was something and I'm not, right? That's very possible for that to happen with people. But what you always have to end up doing is getting to that place of, okay, what am I? And if I'm not what I want to be, how do I get to what I want to be? And you move towards it, right? And you allow that sun to really flourish. And again, it's dependent on your chart, different things, different aspects to it. And I want to talk about the planets and the different signs, but that will be much further down the road, I believe. So the sun is the center, right? It's the core idea, the core theme. It's the identity of who we are. And it's something we have to kind of actively move towards. It's our sense of consciousness, right? That sense of awareness. I'm aware of myself. I'm aware of the outside world, as well as I can be aware of other conscious beings. I can see their suns, right? Now, one other thing with the sun being the center, as I mentioned, the planets move around it. So the sun has a sense of sway, a sense of authority, which means the sun is also going to show our sense of authority and how we interact with other people. If you have a strong sun in your chart, you're likely to be somebody with good leadership skills. And whether you're actively gathering people around you or whether you just have that capability, that part's kind of up to you. But the sun will show our inherent leadership qualities. And that's not to say if you don't have a good sun, you can't be a good leader. There's other things that go into that. But it does go a long way. Another thing with that is the sun is the one that's in charge. It's going to show, right? If the sun in our solar system decides it wants to go north or south, I don't know how you do north, south, east, and west in a space orientation, but let's just say it's going in a direction and it wants to change course and move a different direction. The planets have no choice. They have to follow. And that kind of how our chart is as well. The sun represents that sense of desire, that sense of willpower to move us in a direction. So if we want to be something, the other planets in our chart kind of have to follow that, right? Mars, as when we get to it, we'll talk about it, but Mars is kind of like the hand of the king from Game of Thrones, right? It's the right-hand man. It has to do what the sun says. It's our sense of action. It's carrying out orders. But the sun's always the Mars is always kind of beholden to the sun in specific in that way. But all the other planets in our chart are ultimately kind of go where the sun wants to go, right? It has that level of authority. And so by extension, the sun is going to represent authority and authority figures. Not only our sense of authority in our own life, right? But it's going to represent kings or queens, leaders. It's going to also represent the father. And I want to discuss the father and the mother in separate episodes because that is a very long topic we could get into a lot on. But the sun does represent that father. Now, being the leader, though, right, kind of goes back to this idea of it's shining a light. You're projecting a light in a direction and saying, I'm going here. So it's the leader of the rest of your chart in a way, right? It's the thing driving force there, at least in a conscious sense, in a active sense. But it can also represent our kind of leadership, again, capability outside, as well as leaders we see in our life. Now, one last thing with the sun. The sun gives off warmth, right? Not only does it provide light, and light gives us life, right? Because if you have light, the plants can grow, and if the plants can grow, the animals can eat, right? So you need light. We need light. And the sun provides that. So if the sun kind of goes out, like the light goes out, you're going to see someone who's very much not in a good spot. So it all kind of, again, core thing here with the sun is really goes back to what's the identity? What's the center? What's the central thing? What's the idea? So that's something we want to make sure we figure out at some point in our life. Because if we don't, it's going to be a lot more chaotic, a lot more troublesome, because you're always going to be wondering, the back of your mind, can I do this? Can I be this thing? Am I up to the task? I don't know, because I don't know myself, right? And that's where that all kind of comes back to. But going back to this idea of warmth and light, right? The sun obviously has light, but it also has heat. And what is heat? Well, number one, it keeps us from freezing, right? Provides a sense of comfort, provides a sense of, again, it allows for life to flourish. You need a certain level of heat. But the problem is you don't want too much heat. Because what happens when you have too much heat? Things burn up. So the sun has an inherent harshness to it, where when the sun is too strong, it burns things up. And we kind of talked about this with the fire signs, but the sun really is, in a lot of ways, the fire signs made manifest in some ways, right? It really is that. And so the sun can burn things. We'll talk about this in a different episode about combustion, but planets near the sun kind of get burnt up by it, which means they get damaged. That means they're not as effective. And the sun, in that way, who we are as a person, because the sun is about our central self, our central identity. And so when you have a planet that's focused purely on me, who I am, it doesn't really care for other people. And so that lack of care for other people can be very harsh. It can be abrasive if it's too potent. And so that is one thing to keep in mind, is if we're only focused on ourselves and rely too much on the sun, say, the sun's the only planet I want to worry about, it's going to burn other things up, particularly other people. And it won't really operate in the world in a way that's conducive to society. So that is one thing to keep in mind with the sun. It can be very harsh in that manner. And again, another aspect of that has to do with the father, which I don't really want to cover in this video because, again, that's a whole separate topic that really can go in a couple different directions. Now, as far as the signs that the sun rules Leo. It's the only sign that it rules. The sun and the moon each only rule one sign. All the other planets through Saturn rule two, but the sun and the moon each only rule one. So sun rules Leo. And if we think about that, it makes a ton of sense. It's a fire sign, right? So hot, fiery, passionate. That makes sense for what we just talked about. It's fixed. Perfect, right? What is the key theme for the sun? It's stable, right? It knows what it is. If it knows what it is, it's going to do what it does, right? And so that is kind of the key thing with why the sun rules Leo. It's the perfect spot for it, where the sun can be the sun, right? It can just do its thing, what we know it to do. So that's why it rules Leo. That means by the polarity system in astrology, that means the opposite sign, Aquarius, is where the sun is in exile. So the sun's in exile in Aquarius. Aquarius is very eclectic. It wants to pull from the masses. It wants to pull from everything outside of the center, which means in Aquarius, you get a sun that has to pull its sense of self, its sense of identity from everywhere outside of the center, right? And that's either going to get you a sun that's very brittle and nonsensical because it's pulled from too many places that don't fit together, or it's going to be very robust, right? Because it ultimately be a composite, a multitude of different resources, different things, and that can provide a lot of strength. One thing you start to learn or see in astrology as you study it is that just because a planet is in a sign where it's weak, for instance, like the sun in Aquarius, does not mean it's inherently screwed. A lot of times, actually, some of the best people in a particular field have a planet that's in fall or in exile, where you would think, hey, this is a detriment to them, and yet they're excelling. Why? Because they're finding a way to make that planet work, and in order to make it work, you have to work harder. You have to do it in a way that's unconventional. And so if you have the sun in, say, Aquarius, you have to make sure that the composite of what you are putting into your identity, right? Because it's not going to be one central thing. It's going to be a lot of things. You have to make sure they fit together in a way that's cohesive, as opposed to not cohesive. So then moving on to exaltation. Exaltation is it's like if you put a planet in a sign where it doesn't rule, but it's got tool set that's so good, it just excels beyond what we would expect. And the sun is exalted in Aries. Why? Because Aries is about self-actualization. Aries wants to do, and do it now. It says, I want this thing, and it reaches out and grabs it without hesitation. That's what Aries is about. And so when you put the sun in Aries, what do you get? You get somebody whose identity is self-actualized without hesitation. They're very confident in who they are very quickly and can move and change and become the thing they want to be instantly. So the sun in Aries is extremely potent. Very potent sun. And like I said, it knows what it is. It says, I am, and I'm going to do that, right? It's not even just a sense of, I have a strong sense of self, but now I have a strong sense of self that's going to do something about it, right? It just goes an extra layer, an extra mile. And so that means by extension, again, polarity, where's the sun in fall? The sun's in fall in Libra. Libra is about equality. It's about considering the other person first, right? Taking the other person into account. And so what that means is the sun, when it's in Libra, has to find its identity, has to find its core sense of self through what? Through other people. It's not like Aquarius. Aquarius is just decentralized. It's just going to have to find it through a boatload of different things, but not necessarily through each and every person it meets. I mean, it kind of does, but not completely. But in the case of Libra, it's entirely through other people. And so it's really beholden to others, which is why it's in fall. So for a Libra sun, it's extremely important they find good people around them, put good people around them. So that's the sun. One last thing, there's something in the house system. We haven't talked about the houses too much. I do want to talk about them at some point. But in the house system, you have what's called the joys, right? And so different houses are the joys of certain planets. They tend to get a little bit of their meaning kind of from that planet, sort of. It's kind of, again, I'd have to do a full episode on it. It's a little complex. But the ninth house is the joy of the sun, right? And the ninth house is called the house of God. Why? Because, again, the sun is about what? Who I am, right? It's also about consciousness, right? God, I am. I grew up Christian, and something you learn in the story of, I think it's in Moses when he's talking to the burning bush back in Genesis. And so Moses, he's in this like desert valley or whatever, and he finds this bush and it's on fire, but the bush isn't being consumed, right? The fire's not burning up the bush, and yet it's still on fire. And the bush starts talking to him, and it's God speaking through this bush, through this fire in this bush, I should say. And Moses asks, who is this? And God says, I am, right? Tell him I am sent you. It's this sense of I exist, I am. And it's a complete, there is no present, no future, no past. It's just I am right now. And that's, in a lot of ways, encapsulates that kind of godness of the sun. If we think of a lot of ancient mythologies, a lot of ancient cultures, they really saw the sun god as always being one of the most prominent gods in their pantheons, right? Because it was so important. And in a lot of ways, the father, in some senses, kind of acts as the god within the family unit. That's a very traditional way of looking at things, obviously. It's 2025, I get it. But the sun represents that kind of almost God piece of us, right? That consciousness. We're awake. We have a soul. We have something more than just being a kind of physical, instinctual animal. And that's that sun. And so the ninth house then is about what? It's about expanding who we are, about expanding our horizons, which means the ninth house is the joy of the sun. So, to recap, the sun is going to represent consciousness. It's going to represent our visibility in the world, kind of our visibility in the sense of what we're trying to do, our conscious desire to do something, to be something, how we kind of show our inner light. It's going to be our identity, the central core of who we are and what we're trying to be and become. And it's going to be our sense of authority, as well as the authority figures in our life, particularly our father. And so that's what the sun represents. I think next week we're going to look at the moon, finish off the the sun-moon combo, and then we'll move on to the other planets. So if you enjoyed that, thank you for listening. And I will apologize for kind of delayed. I've been sick, and so that's why this episode took a little longer to get out than I had originally planned. And I think moving forward, we'll get back to our normal schedule. So thank you for listening. And if you have looking for a consultation, you can email me at james@jdastrology.com. And I think that's it. Thank you.